Ever get that feeling? Like when something you know so well suddenly seems wrong, almost like a glitch in the Matrix.
Yeah, like a familiar song, but with one note totally off key.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving deep into today. A time when the USS Voyager went into a dark matter nebula and some seriously weird stuff went down.
Things got pretty strange.
This deep dive we've prepped for you is all about Voyager's encounter with this nebula and the bizarre events that followed. We're using the original Star Trek Voyager episode, Cathexis.
A classic.
Absolutely. We've also got the Wikipedia entry on the episode and the Memory Alpha page too, so we've got lots to dig into. And our mission, to really break down what happened, understand the core mystery, and explore all the twists and turns Voyager faced.
It's going to be a wild ride.
It really is. So what's striking right from the start is how the episode begins with a sense of normalcy before things go haywire. We see Captain Janeway in her holonovel. She's enjoying a classic Victorian drama.
With a stormy night setting, naturally.
Of course. There's simmering tension between Mrs. Davenport and Mrs. Templeton, and Lord Burleigh drops some ominous hints about the fourth floor.
It's almost like a comforting scene, this familiar escape. And that makes the emergency that followed even more jarring.
So true. It's this sharp contrast that Memory Alpha highlights, juxtaposing the familiar with the totally alien, which really underscores the crew's isolation out there in the Delta Quadrant.
They are a long way from home.
Yeah, millions of light years. So 1 minute Janeway's in 19th century England, and the next, bam. Ensign Kim calls with a frantic report. A shuttle carrying Chakotay and Tuvok is unresponsive.
Heavily damaged. Multiple hull fractures. Not good.
It's a serious situation.
Yeah.
And when they get to sickbay, the doctor's assessment only deepens the mystery.
Well, Tuvok has a concussion.
Right, which is bad, but treatable.
True. But Chakotay, all of his bioneural energy has been extracted. He's basically brain dead.
It's a chilling way to kick off this whole investigation.
Yeah.
So how does the Wikipedia entry describe the crew's immediate reaction to all of this?
It highlights the confusion and concern, especially among the senior staff. They're facing a medical crisis with Chakotay and no explanation for what happened. The only lead they have is Tuvok's fragmented memories.
He remembers bits and pieces.
Right. He remembers that they were on a routine trade mission with the Illidarians, and then this dark matter nebula appeared out of nowhere.
Which, as Memory Alpha points out, are known for being unpredictable.
Very unpredictable. Then an unidentified ship appears and attacks their shuttle with an energy weapon.
Tuvok remembers seeing the attacking ship retreat back into the nebula. But here's the problem. The shuttle sensor logs are totally wiped, a complete overload. So their primary source of information is gone.
Vanish.
So frustrating. They naturally want to investigate, to go back to the nebula and find out who attacked them. But that's when things start to get weird. Voyager suddenly changes course, moving sharply away from the nebula.
Out of the blue.
Paris, who was at the helm, insists he didn't do it. And then it happens again. This time, helm control is totally logged out, and the command is traced back to navigational control.
And get this. Memory Alpha notes that Torres was in navigational control right before the second incident.
Which immediately raises suspicions, right?
Oh, absolutely. It makes you wonder if someone on board is deliberately sabotaging the investigation.
And this pattern of strange behavior continues. Paris denies any involvement in those course changes. And later, Torres is somehow involved in a warp core shutdown.
But again, she has no memory of doing it.
It's like they're being controlled.
Right. And what's really fascinating is that the doctor finds these unusual neural electrical signatures in both Paris's and Torres's memory engrams. And these signatures line up perfectly with when these unexplained actions occurred.
So at the exact moment they're doing these things, there's this unusual brain activity.
Yeah, it's like someone else is in their heads. The doctor theorizes that some external entity, something non-corporeal, is briefly taking control of their minds.
It sounds almost like a ghost or something.
Almost. And this entity's goal seems to be to keep Voyager away from that nebula.
Like it's a warning.
Or a trap.
It's giving me goosebumps just thinking about it. And, Memory Alpha even mentions some theories about encounters with energy-based life forms in Star Trek universe. So it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility.
It could be something we haven't even imagined yet.
I love that. So you've got this mystery, possibility of sabotage, and then this crazy idea of alien possession. That's a lot to take in.
And remember, Chakotay is still in sickbay, brain dead. And Torres, she's trying to help him.
In her own way.
Yes. She uses the medicine wheel and the coyote stone. It's this deeply personal and spiritual act. And the doctor, well, he's a scientist. He admits there's nothing more he can do medically.
He's out of his depth.
Totally. And Memory Alpha even talks about the symbolism of the Coyote Stone in certain Native American traditions. It represents transformation and the trickster spirit, which is so interesting considering the deception that's going on. It's like the episode is playing with these different ways of understanding the unknown.
That's a great point. And then we have Keys. She starts experiencing this unsettling presence in her quarters and even in the mess hall. She describes it as almost a physical sensation, but she can't see it.
And it's different from her usual telepathic experiences.
Yeah, like something is there, but not really.
Exactly. And it really adds to the growing feeling that there's something else on Voyager, something messing with them.
And just when you think it can't get any weirder, the warp core shuts down, completely out of the blue. And once again, Torres has no memory of initiating the shutdown. It's a disaster. Voyager is vulnerable.
And Janeway has to act fast. She decides to temporarily transfer command codes to the Doctor.
Because a hologram can't be possessed, right?
Right, that's the logic. But even that plan backfires. The Doctor is deactivated, and the diagnostics trace the shutdown command to somewhere above Deck 4.
It's like this entity is always one step ahead.
Like, it can see their every move.
So what does Memory Alpha say about the security protocols surrounding the Doctor's program?
Well, it says there are usually a lot of safeguards in place to prevent anyone from just shutting down the Doctor, but somehow this entity bypassed them. And remember, Janeway trusts the Doctor implicitly, so the fact that he could be deactivated at all shows how powerful this entity is.
It's scary how easily it can manipulate Voyager's systems.
And now the threat is even more real. Janeway realizes this entity can jump between crew members. They can't trust anyone. And then things get even worse. Kes and Tuvok are attacked in a turbo lift, some kind of energy discharge.
And again, no trace on the internal sensors.
It's like a ghost attack. And this is where the paranoia really sets in.
Everyone's suspicious of each other.
Exactly. And Neelix becomes totally convinced that anyone acting even slightly off is possessed.
Love Neelix. He's always so dramatic.
Totally. And even the Doctor, Mr. Logic himself, starts to get a little paranoid. He calls it escalating paranoia, but you can tell he's a little freaked out too.
I don't blame him. But then they get a real clue. The Doctor finds contusions on Keys's neck and shoulder. And they look exactly like a Vulcan neck pinch.
And Tuvok doesn't remember anything.
Suddenly, the most logical, disciplined person on the ship is the prime suspect.
It's a classic red herring. And the Wikipedia entry actually mentions how the episode uses these misdirections to keep the audience guessing.
It's so clever. But then, just when you think Tuvok is the culprit, Torres finds something in the shuttle's sensor logs. She discovers that the logs weren't just damaged, they were deliberately erased, and the sensor matrix was overloaded on purpose. So it wasn't an accident. Someone tampered with the logs.
Right. And even more shocking, the backup logs show that there was no other ship present during the attack. The energy discharge came from the nebula itself.
It's a total game changer. Tuvok wasn't attacked. Something happened inside the nebula. And if the logs were erased, it means Tuvok lied.
Why would he do that?
That's the million-dollar question. So Janeway confronts Tuvok. She points out all the inconsistencies, like the fake, engineless ship ion trail he reported. And that's when he finally reveals the truth. He's possessed
by an alien entity called a Komar.
He says their goal is to feed on the neural energy of Voyager's crew.
It's terrifying, and then he seizes control of the ship and heads straight for the nebula.
It's such a betrayal. They trusted him.
Yeah. And Memory Alpha describes the Komar as these non-corporeal beings. They need a biological host to survive in our dimension.
So they can't exist on their own?
Not in the way we understand it. But wait, there's another twist. As Voyager is heading towards the nebula, the warp core is ejected, and the computer shows that the authorization code came from Chakotay.
This is the aha moment. Janeway realizes there must be another force at play.
Someone else is trying to protect them.
It has to be Chakotay. Even though his body is unresponsive, his consciousness is somehow influencing the ship.
And Wikipedia calls this one of the biggest plot twists in all of Star Trek.
It's incredible. Even in his disembodied state, Chakotay is looking out for his crew.
It's amazing. And as Voyager is pushed deeper into the nebula by the emergency thrusters, Janeway activates Torres' magneton flash scan
to try and disrupt the entity.
Exactly. And it works. Tuvok is freed from the Komar.
But they're still stuck in the nebula. So how do they get out?
This is where things get really interesting. Chakotay, using Neelix as a kind of conduit, rearranges the stones on his medicine wheel.
He's possessing Neelix.
In a way, yeah. And Paris sees the new pattern of the stones and recognizes it as a map. It's showing them a safe passage through the nebula.
Using the positions of 3 planetoids.
Precisely. It's like a cosmic connect the dots, and it's beautiful how Chakotay's spiritual knowledge helps them escape this technological nightmare.
I love how the episode blends science and spirituality.
It's one of the things that makes Star Trek so great. So they navigate the nebula, get back to normal space, and even recover their warp core.
And then the Doctor does what he does best.
He saves the day. Using some incredibly advanced techniques, he's able to restore Chakotay's consciousness.
It's remarkable. And Memory Alpha points out how sophisticated the Doctor's holographic programming is. He can do things that real doctors can only dream of.
He's a miracle worker. So finally Chakotay's back, and he can explain what happened to him.
It must have been a bizarre experience.
He talks about feeling like he was floating, unable to interact with the physical world, and then he realized he could share his consciousness, subtly influence the thoughts and actions of others just by focusing his will.
So he could actually control people.
Not control, but influence. And it was unintentional at first. He was just trying to help. And he apologizes to Tuvok, who's understandably confused and shaken.
I can't imagine what that must have been like for Tuvok, to be possessed by an alien entity.
A traumatic experience, for sure. But Janeway welcomes Chakotay back and acknowledges how important he was in their survival. Even without a body, he was still their commander.
It's a powerful message about the strength of the human spirit.
So to wrap up this deep dive, let's look at the big takeaways. This episode reminds us about the dangers of venturing into the unknown.
Especially in space.
Right. We also see the resilience and loyalty of Voyager's crew. They face external threats and internal conflict and find a way through it all. And finally, Cathexis explores the nature of consciousness itself.
And the possibility that it can exist outside the body.
Exactly. So for you, our listeners who are looking for in-depth knowledge, this deep dive into Cathexis gives you a detailed and hopefully exciting understanding of this pivotal event in Voyager's journey. It shows how understanding a situation requires us to think outside the box and consider possibilities we might initially dismiss.
The answer isn't always obvious.
Right. And on that note, let's leave you with a final thought to ponder. If consciousness can exist and even act outside of a physical body, what does that mean for our understanding of life and death? Could there be other forms of awareness, other intelligences existing alongside us that we just can't perceive yet?
It's a question worth thinking about. The universe is full of mysteries. And until our next deep dive, keep exploring.
There's always more to learn.
Absolutely.
Live long and prosper.
You too.